warehouse slash tasting room slash barrel room, soon to be, hopefully. And we are going to have a very, very quick live stream video here about a new whiskey that's come in to the store to provide some tasty notes so that when you're looking at the product on the website, you can see it in real time. We do these live, these short videos live for two reasons, mainly. One, to make it easier for me, to not to edit and upload and cut and all that sort of things. And also means if I stuff up, you get to see it as well. It's a little bit rawer. But the whiskey we're going to talk about quickly tonight is a new one that's just landed in store. We're the only ones in Australia that have this to sell from a retail point of view. But it is from Wilson Morgan, as the label doesn't quite show up there. If I bring it a little bit closer, it might be. Wilson Morgan, 12-year-old, 2008, Linkwood. We'll drag it back there and have a bit of fun with it. So Wilson Morgan are an Italian-based bottler. There I am back in focus. And they've been creating an independent bottling whiskey for a number of years now. The company, the parent company that it sort of founded from, has been going for many, many years. I think, well back into the 60s and 70s they were buying whiskey, but the whiskies we see today sort of from the 90s. But I think more importantly than that, and I do love what these guys do, and this is sort of why we've jumped on this particular bottling, is our love of Linkwood and the Linkwood distillery. So I'm going to pour a bit of a dram here of this. We're pretty much in the neck pour here. We'll just have a quick chat about this, but chat about Linkwood. So Linkwood is one of the Diageo distilleries. It's a bit of a workhorse. The term workhorse in Scotch whisky sort of alludes to whiskies that work really hard, have quite big capacities, but never get the glory. So they're behind the scenes, and certainly that's true with Linkwood. It goes into a multitude of blends across the Diageo portfolio, I dare say. Well, I know for a fact it goes into other ones as well. There's no real official single malt bottling of Linkwood. There is the Flora and Fauna series, which is a Diageo brand that we don't really see in Australia. Gordon & MacPhail's, I assume, have some sort of filling contract with Linkwood because they're able to release a 15 and a 25-year-old fairly consistently, not as consistent as they used to be, but you can't go out and buy a Linkwood day in, day out. So it's really through the indies that we see this. And I think, one of the important, it's a historic distillery, 1826, no, maybe a bit earlier. 1824, I think they started production, and Peter Brown might have founded it before that. But it's a distillery that's been knocked down and rebuilt a couple of times, and so although it's historic, it's still quite modern. It's not like a Springbank or something that's got equipment from 17 centuries ago. But it does have a very traditional way in the fact that it produces whiskey. It's resisted the urge, as a lot of distilleries did in the 80s and 90s, to reduce fermentation time. So quite a long fermentation, going from 65 to 105 hours, depending on what day of the week and what month it is. And a slow distillation really to eke out flavour. And one of the curious things that's quite unique about Linkwood is the spirit stills, which is the second process. Your wash will go into your wash still, then your spirit still are actually bigger than the wash stills, when normally it's the other way around. And what that does in the spirit still is just physically more space, more copper contact interaction. And for me, it makes one of Scotland's best single malts. It's a whiskey that's very fresh and grassy when young, but then as it ages, develops this real complexity and this oiliness, this real beautiful texture. And for me, whiskey is the art of drinking less and drinking better. And as much as flavour is a huge part of that, for me, texture and the experience of drinking that whiskey and Linkwood is really, really important. So we've stocked a lot of Linkwoods because there is no official bottling. They tend to be a little bit different, and people throw different cask finishes and different maturations and different strengths and all that sort of stuff at it. The one we're looking at today is, as I mentioned, Wilson Morgan. So it's a 2008 distillation. It's a 12-year-old, bottled at 58%. It was bottled last year, and it's a sherry, Pedro Jimenez sherry cask finish. Now, just looking at this, and on the back we can see here there's 548 bottles in this release. The word single cask doesn't appear here, and even though I dare say it came from a single Pedro Jimenez butt, we can see down the bottom on the label here it says comes from casks 308645 and 308646. Now that's almost certainly relating to Linkwood numbering of casks and what that cask was numbered, because Wilson Morgan as a company wouldn't have anywhere near 300,000 casks of Linkwood sitting around. But I kind of like the idea that instead of putting a couple of casks of, say they were ex-bourbon hogsheads, maybe you get 200, 300, equivalent bottles out of each, throw them into a big sherry butt for a year, and then release it as a single cask. They've sort of kept that word away and said it's been finished in a PX cask, but at least 2 barrels have gone into this. So that's pure speculation on my part, but that's what I'm sort of reading into on the label. So let's get into that. Now we can see on the colour. Let's talk about that very quickly. Is put it in front of my face, which is the widest thing certainly on this stream. Now it is a gorgeous colour, and I always find that quite funny when people go, "It's a gorgeous colour in the glass," and it's sort of like, well, a colour is just a colour, and me personally, I don't really have any preferences on the beauty of shades of brown, but I actually think this colour is a beautiful colour. Like if it was in a pencil or on a paint, in a paint tin, I think it would still be a beautiful colour. Sort of got that copperish hue. It's quite but like with gold sort of flecks to it. So I think it's quite a beautiful colour. Of course, colour means absolutely nothing when it comes to the flavour of whiskey or the age or anything like that. It can be an indicator, but it's certainly by no means the be-all and end-all. So this has almost certainly taken most of that colour from the Pedro Jimenez finish. Pedro Jimenez being a really deep and sweet style of sherry. The bit of the joke is Oloroso, which is nuttier and drier, and in PX, which is predominantly sugar. Excuse me. If you hold a PX bottle with the cork out upside down, it should take a while to fall out. It's so thick and viscous. That's sort of the old saying about the differences, but certainly it's had its say on the nose. I'm almost getting a bit of wood polish on the nose. Certainly not that very typical fresh cut grass sort of thing that we sometimes get from Linkwoods. It is a little bit floral though, and it's quite toasty. There's a bit of like a toasty note, and I think that's coming through as we get into it. But there's quite a bit of malt here. There's quite a bit of cereally, malty sort of things on the nose, which I think is a really big plus, because I don't want particularly a Linkwood where I want, I'm looking for a Linkwood for the fact that I love the spirit and the texture and what they do. I don't want the cast to dominate. And I've certainly had some Linkwoods that, in a blind tasting, you wouldn't be able to pick it. But this tastes like whiskey. And again, loving that Wilson and Morgan have been a little bit restrained on that sort of element. We don't know how long the PX finish was for. It just says PX finish. This is my first whiskey of the day as well. And, for what it's worth, at 58%, it's certainly not aggressive at all. It's very, very pleasant on the nose. Quite mild. That's as that sort of sweetness. I know that I think the bottlers have pointed out that there might be a bit of a winey nose. I can certainly see where they're coming from, but that's really subsided after that initial pop of the cork and pour. It's certainly more malty and cereal notes here. We'll dive in. Big palate. In fact, I'm gonna change that. It's a big end to the palate. It's certainly, if the nose sort of, after that sort of winey sweet hit, settled down a bit, the entry to the palate is nice and easy, and it grows and grows and grows, and the finish is quite a extravaganza. Actually, there's a bit of spice. There's a bit of bit of spritziness to it, spritzy in the flavour, not in the texture. But we're going to roll back a little bit, because that entry to the palate is very, very Linkwood for me. I've just underlined here that oiliness. It's quite fat. Words like creamy and buttery, which get used for a lot of different whiskies. They're certainly coming to mind here. It sort of fits into that camp as we expect Linkwood to do. Of Dalhousie, of Mortlach, of to a lesser extent Clynelish. Actually, it feels a bit fatter than some of the other Linkwoods I've had. Sometimes they can be really, really delicate and precise with light florals and grassy notes, and I think those elements were there. The sherry cask element has just sort of boosted them up and really bulked them out, because it is quite a broad Linkwood across the palate than what I've had before. That big spice sort of finish that sort of rolls through, that rolls into the finish. I think it would have been quite a short to medium finish, but that spice really drags it out. Medium, virgin. I mean, I'm talking now and I can still taste it, so medium to whatever. Yeah, and whiskey is my jam. Pointing out that Scotty and the Oak Barrel have another Linkwood. As you can see, as I'm sure Whiskey is my jam has, this is my not surprise faced at the moment that the Oak Barrel is stocking another Linkwood, because we absolutely love it here. So I've added a bit of water here to see what that does to some of those bigger fortified wine notes that we got through in the sherry. A little bit more vanilla, and I don't know if I've talked myself into it by saying buttery before. There's a little bit of whipped butter or something on that nose. Very, very pastry. It's certainly on the sweeter end of Linkwoods. Even, if with a bit of water, I think that sherry influence is sort of rescinded a little bit. I don't know if I'll do water again though, because I really like that nose at 58. I really thought that was a sweet spot there. 58, again, I'm purely speculating here. It's 58 exactly, so almost certainly this is not natural cask strength, but will have been dropped from, maybe a 60 or something down to that. Maybe the two casks, when they went in, was slightly different and brought back up. Yeah, palate, again, that pastry sweetness, that texture, that thickness, that that real warming, broad sort of note. I mean, the water hasn't affected the palate at all. The spice is a little bit different. There's a little bit more dried citrus. When you get those dehydrated, citrus things that you put in your gin and tonics and that sort of stuff. There's that when you open that packet. There's a little bit of that going on there. And the spice has been mellowed a bit on the finish here, which is quite interesting. But I'm going to get back to that palate, and who would have thunk it? As Whiskey's my jam was saying, Scotty gets excited about texture on a Linkwood again. I had this question posed to me a little while ago: is what really got me into whiskies and spirits in general when I was younger, and when I was 18, 19 years old, I really sort of leaned that way. Maybe it was when I was 18, it was perhaps a bit of a economic decision. If you get a bottle of some sort of spirits for $40 or $50, that might last you a couple of weeks as opposed to a case of beer. But I love that concept of the distillation, the purification of the flavors, but also that when it hits your mouth, it arrives. When you see people have spirits maybe for the first time, or a type of spirit, and they sort of recoil a little bit, often that can be construed as a negative. But I love that. I love a whiskey drink that sort of says, I'm here. I'm not going to just be this throwaway thing that you can be in the background of whatever you're doing. Now, I'm a focal part of the conversation or the group of friends you're with, or whatever you're doing. I'm making my presence felt. And, obviously, I don't recoil like I probably did when I was 18 years old when I had my first whiskey. But I still love a whiskey and a spirit that, makes itself known, that has a presence. And you see, people who've been drinking whiskey for 40, 50 years, experts in their game, they see those similar sort of things. And I think that's a really important part about drinking and appreciating whiskey. And Linkwood is certainly a distillery that does it. And this whiskey certainly is an example of that. It's quite different with water. It's got a lot more pastry sweetness. It's almost a dessert-ish whiskey, which we've seen from Linkwoods in the past, even when they don't have sherry finishes and that sort of thing. Certainly in first fill bourbon casks, that lightness and that freshness from that cut grass as it gets to about that, 7, 8 years old can really drag in some sweetness. But this is quite an interesting one. I've tried some Linkwoods that have been exclusively sherried as well, and this is a very different beast because it's still got that DNA. It's just been given a bit of a jab of, for lack of a better word, personality. Not that I think Linkwood doesn't have personality, but it's been given a bit of extra personality inserted in the back there. Yeah. 58%. No, there's the spice again. But yeah, just the slightest hint of dried citrus there. Yeah, but I want to say a little bit more oily than waxy in the texture, and you feel that in the finish as well. If that can make difference, it's waxy is a little bit more defined in its flavour. And you probably go a little bit more honeyed when you talk about wax. I'm not getting a huge amount of that, but it is very this slippery, oily sort of texture as it glides down on the palate. So thoroughly enjoyable. I'm just adding a bit of water there, somewhere between probably 53 and 58 is going to be the sweet spot for me for drinking that one. And apologies, we've gone for the 15 minutes now. I was only going to go for 10 on this quick little ramble, but if you want to click on the link, or if you're watching this on the website, it'll be above me or below me somewhere. A little bit more history on the distillery, probably better. I can explain things arguably better written down with more detail than I can when I'm getting excited about whiskey. But thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back at some point with some more whiskey in the future. Cheers.